Welcome back to Reality Asserts Itself on the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Baltimore. We're continuing our discussion with Roger Waters and Sut Jhally. We're talking about the new film, The Occupation of the American Mind, Israel's Public Relations War in the United States. And you really I'm not going to introduce the guys again because you really should go back and watch this from the beginning because I think it's a fascinating interview. The importance of the next clip we're going to show you is that even some of the most liberal major media commentators buy in to the same narrative, Israel's victim, and seem very reluctant. And some of these people should know better or really do know better and don't want to say so, including Rachel Maddow. So here's a clip from the film.
Look at how American media covered Israel's 2014 attack on Gaza. A keyword search of all the major networks showed that over the course of the 51-day assault, Israel's ongoing military siege and blockade of Gaza were barely mentioned compared to the thousands of times Hamas rocket attacks on Israel were mentioned.
Why is Hamas launching missiles into population centers of Israel?
The basic propaganda frame is built into the very assumptions journalists bring to the table.
Since Israel pulled out of Gaza in 2005, 8,000 rockets have been fired from Gaza into Israel.
This is how propaganda works. It works by getting your words in the mouths of other people, especially the mouths of supposedly objective media commentators.
I'm wondering, though, whether you're outraged by the conduct of Hamas, starting the conflict by firing rockets, building tunnels to kill and kidnap Israelis, being more than willing to sacrifice Palestinian lives by embedding them into their own kind of arsenal and using them, as Israel contends, as human shields. Do you have a level of outrage at Hamas itself?
It doesn't seem like propaganda at all. It just seems like news. And this goes across all the major media, including the supposedly most liberal. Look at Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, who's known as the leading progressive voice on mainstream television. She did only 4 segments on the war. And during these few segments, she never once mentioned Israel's ongoing occupation of the West Bank or its siege and blockade of Gaza, and never once mentioned the fact that the US has armed Israel with the very weapons that were being used against the defenseless civilian population. Instead, choosing to frame the invasion as part of a senseless cycle of violence perpetrated by both sides.
It's been a constant cycle of fighting between Israel and Hamas for the past several years in Gaza. And the fighting and the cause of the fighting feel terribly familiar because this is basically a recurring war. And if it feels like deja vu, feels like, ugh, I've heard all of this before, you are right. Because this really does keep happening over and over and over again.
Rachel Maddow, the most important woman on MSNBC, the leader when it comes to politics. In 6 weeks of war, never mentioned the word blockade, occupation, illegal settlements, never mentioned the support that Congress have for Israel, unconditional amount of money, billions of dollars. What is that? What a disappointment. Our media operations, national media, is a scandal when it comes to Israel.
That was Rachel Maddow essentially doing the same thing as the rest of major media, including whether it's Fox or NBC or so on. Roger, you wanted to say something about the clip.
Well, yeah. It's a thing as well about the mainstream media is that if you don't toe the party line, if you don't follow the line, and very particularly on Israel, you will be fired. You will lose your job. So it's no huge surprise that everybody takes the same line and says the same thing. Because people care about their salary at the end of the day, and people can be bought, and people can be sold. That is the nature of life in this country, and it's really sad.
I mean, it's interesting.
If you ask, even if you're in the press corps at the White House, if you ask difficult questions, you don't get asked to ask a question again, or you will not be invited, or you will not be on Air Force One flying off somewhere to cover a trip.
Yeah, we saw what happened to Helen Thomas.
You have to say the right things, or you won't be invited.
Yeah, Helen Thomas, I don't think it's mentioned in your film, but it's a very good example of what happens to a journalist who's a veteran White House journalist in the front row because of her seniority, and they hound her out of the press corps for asking exactly the kinds of challenging questions Roger's talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, as I said, on the one hand, there's the control of the narrative. At the same time, there's this culture of intimidation. So people are just scared to even, to ask basic questions around this, because they know what happens when you do. When you try and humanize the Palestinians in any way, you're immediately shut down. In the film, we have the example of Ayman Moyeldin, who was an NBC reporter who was playing soccer with 4 kids on the beach in Gaza, and just before they were killed by a missile. And when he posted the reaction of the parents to this, to the loss of their kids, NBC's reaction was to pull him out of Gaza. I mean, that become, when reporters see that, when reporters see what happens when you try and do the job of journalism. I mean, essentially, American media have given up journalism when it comes to this issue. Yeah. They've just given up trying to be journalists.
I critique Sanders for being part of that Senate vote, that Israel has a right to defend itself. But on the other hand, what he did say when he spoke recently about his Middle East policy, and actually said there's such a thing as Palestinian rights, which is ridiculous that should be a thing. The media reported on it and then completely moved on as if he kind of never said it. But it did show that the sky did not fall when Sanders said that. It's not like I don't think there's any evidence that he lost electoral support, even in New York State. Maybe some. I don't think Orthodox were probably voting for him anyway.
I think the Bernie Sanders moment was an incredible moment when he said that during the debate. I mean, part of what he said, even though it was very minor, he framed it by saying, of course, Israel has a right to defend itself, of course, and then he said a small part about Palestinian rights. But I think the most radical part, or the most interesting part of that, was the people in the audience cheering, which is an indication that something is happening. There is some crack amongst certain segments of the population around this issue.
Well, let's show another clip from the film, which is just about this, which is in fact how the narrative is changing. And let me declare a conflict of interest in the beginning of this, because in this clip, I think it's in the clip, but in the film at any rate, there's a mention of media outlets which are not following the official narrative here, and Real News is mentioned as one. But at any rate, here's the clip.
Over just the past few years, the proliferation of social media and internet news sources has made it increasingly difficult for the Israeli government and pro-Israel groups in the US to manage American perceptions of the conflict. Video footage and reporting from the ground bearing witness to the reality of the occupation are now more accessible than ever on the internet. In addition, over the past few years, a number of high-profile documentaries made by Israeli and Palestinian filmmakers alike have trained a harsh light on current Israeli policy and the repression of Palestinian rights.
זה כפר קטן, קטן. מה אתם חושבים? אין לכם לב? אין לכם משפחה? כל אחד מכם יודע זה אדמה של בלעים. אתם גנבתם אדמה שלנו.
At the same time, a powerful new boycott, divestment and sanctions movement has been gaining momentum and raising awareness of the occupation. While activists from the Black Lives Matter movement have been making explicit connections between police violence against African Americans and the Israeli military's repression of Palestinians.
We stand next to people who continue to courageously struggle and resist the occupation. People who continue to dream and fight for freedom. From Ferguson to Palestine, the struggle for freedom continues.
And all of these developments seem to be having an effect. Polls now show that while sympathy for Israel remains at all-time highs among older Americans, it has been hemorrhaging among young people.
Despite the efforts of the lobby, something really striking is taking place. Lots of young people are abandoning the mainstream media and turning instead to other independent sources. So they have a totally different way of making sense of what's happening, an unfiltered view of Israel's repression. And pro-Israel operatives like Frank Luntz are in a panic. In his latest report, he calls what's happening with young people a disaster and demands that Israel supporters respond. And people have answered the call. You have powerful right-wing billionaires like Sheldon Adelson, a major donor to Republican candidates, bankrolling a campaign to silence and intimidate student activists on college campuses. But it's not working. Groups like Students for Justice in Palestine, who see what's happening to Palestinians as a civil rights issue, have refused to be intimidated. They're refusing to back down, even though they're being labeled as anti-Semitic and terrorist sympathizers. And their numbers are growing.
Hey, hey! Oh, oh! as the discourse begins to open, more people are starting to understand this as a rights-based issue, not an issue of radicalism. This is a movement for the rights of people whose rights are being denied, who are living under occupation, who want to live in their country freely just like anybody else.
You can see just so many video clips of kids having their hands smashed by soldiers with batons. You can see just so many pictures of thousands of people being killed, as happened in Gaza. And at a certain point, there's a cognitive dissonance. You realize that what you're being told is a pack of lies.
The landscape is changing. As powerful as this media campaign has been, there are church organizations at the national level supporting boycott, divestment, sanctions against Israel. Major unions have adopted this, certainly on campuses, student bodies. It's in spite of tremendous pressure being called essentially an anti-Semite. People are seeing past this. The mood seems to be changing.
Well, I think it's changing on the margins and important places in the margins. So it's not a totally blanket thing anymore. There are places, young people, church groups, community groups. I think the new Black Lives Matter movement are seeing the connections between police violence in the cities here and military violence against Palestinians. So I think those connections are starting to be made, and they're being made on the margins. And I think what we have to do now is to take those cracks and make them a flood.
You know, there's an important one. It's in your film where I guess it's in the clip, one of the activists from Ferguson says, you know, from Ferguson to Palestine, we're fighting for freedom. Well, we see that in Baltimore. You know, Baltimore is a city that's 65% African American. And the link between the black activists in Baltimore feeling a real kinship with the struggle in Palestine, it's quite strong. In fact, more with Palestine than perhaps anything else going on in the world.
I was at a movie premiere a couple of weeks ago. It was miles ahead. I like the movie. It's about Miles Davis. But anyway, when they'd finished talking to Don Cheadle and who else was in it? I can't remember now. But a couple of reporters came over to me. One was from People magazine and one was from New York Daily News, neither of which publications I expect much sympathy from. Really interesting. A couple of years ago, or 3 or whatever, they might have asked me this question: why are you an anti-Semite? That's what they would have said to me then. Why are you so anti-Semitic? Now they say to me, and they both asked me the same question, they said, how do you feel when people accuse you of being an anti-Semite? Now that is a huge shift. It may sound subtle, but it's not. It opens up the question of whether I am anti-Semitic or not, which is a question that you couldn't even approach 2 or 3 years ago. It was just assumed that I was because you know, what's their name? The Wiesenthal, Simon Wiesenthal, you know, organization in Los Angeles had said I was, so therefore I must be. I think it's really interesting the way even in People magazine and the Daily News, the attitude is just changing a little bit. I'm so excited by it. It's so exciting to be here now and watch this thing turning around because the momentum is changing. The students and the churches and the people in Baltimore and Black Lives Matter joining together with their brothers and sisters in Palestine. And so it's becoming, the movement is spreading, and we care about the Black Lives Matter movement as much as we care about BDS. It's all fundamentally important because it's all about the fact that we're all human beings and there is no us and them. We are only us and all our lives matter. And once we can din that into people's hearts, we will be unstoppable as a movement. And I look forward to that time, and it's coming soon. I believe that. Sorry, I digressed.
No, not at all. So talk a little bit more about how you're going to get this film out.
Yeah. I mean, I think Roger's absolutely correct. You know, and it's not accidental. It's not just that it happened, you know, out of nowhere. It's been the end result of a long period of activism by, you know, many people over the years. But I think we are now starting to see some daylight in small places. And I think what we now need to do is we now need resources to get people to think clearly about these things even more. and to so that they can talk about these issues in a knowledgeable way. I mean, I think one of the things we wanted to do with our film, I don't think many people would be shocked to say, to think that we're in the middle of a propaganda campaign by Israel. You look at the media. I mean, people are really frustrated. I know people were throwing things at their televisions during the last Gaza war. What the film does, and I think this is very, very powerful, what the film does is answer the question, why? And it gives people a way to peek behind the propaganda and to see how it has been put in place. And once you know how something has been put in place, you can start to take it apart. That's the value of doing this kind of work, which is why we hope the film will be shown, especially in community screenings and community settings, where you can have discussion around it. We have a whole strategy to make sure that it's shown on as many campuses as possible. If you're a professor, or if you're a graduate student, or if you're an undergraduate, get your library to buy it so it becomes part of the permanent collection. Organize a screening on campus. If you're a church group, or if you're a community group, organize a screening so that people can have a chance to come together to talk about this. Because I think the time is right, as Roger said. I don't think there's ever been a time like this. And the question is, do we take advantage of it? And do we have the resources to move things forward? Right. So it's a very, very hopeful period. And I hope the film will be part of that movement.
Well, this fight is obviously going to... So Roger, did you want to have a final word?
Yeah, here.
Here, okay.
Yeah, he's right. I agree with everything that Sut's saying. And I think it is an exciting time. And we shall overcome. We are all in this together. And the more connections that human beings make with one another and recognize that one man's predicament is all of our predicaments.
One more time, Sut, where can people see the film?
People can see the film at www.occupationmovie.com. And they can stream it there, or they can buy a DVD to screen as well.
Another way you can get to the film streaming, which is, I think, $5 to watch the film, or you can buy a DVD, is on the Real News homepage. You'll see a copy of this movie poster. If you click on it, it will take you to the page where you can get to the film. Okay, thanks very much, Sut. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you for having us on.
I hope we can do this again. And we're going to end by showing a couple more clips from the film. But thank you for joining us on Reality Asserts Itself on the Real News Network.
On July 8, 2014, Israel launched a devastating military attack on the Gaza Strip. Over the course of 51 days, the Israeli military dropped nearly 20,000 tons of explosive on Gaza, a densely populated area the size of Philadelphia, killing over 2,000 Palestinians and wounding tens of thousands more. The overwhelming majority of these casualties were civilians.
This strip of land is being bombarded from the air, sea and land.
Israel launched at least 160 strikes on the Gaza Strip.
And there's one less hospital in Gaza now. Israel today flattened Wafa Hospital.
The sheer scale of the attack sparked outrage and condemnation around the world.
Israel's month-long pounding of Gaza shocked many people around the world. Mass demonstrations have been held in many of the world's major cities.
But in the United States, the story was different. Polls showed the American people holding firm in their support for Israel.
This is the latest CNN ORC poll of Americans. Shows 57% of those polls say Israel's action in Gaza is justified. 34% say unjustified.
These numbers were striking, but they weren't new. Over the course of a conflict in which Palestinian casualties have far outnumbered Israeli casualties, the American people have consistently shown far more sympathy for Israelis than for Palestinians.
It's very difficult to divorce public opinion on any question from the media coverage that people rely on to form opinions. And I think the most prevalent lesson from looking at the coverage is that the coverage tends to see this conflict from the Israeli side.